March 13th, 2024. Well, I want to discuss the issue of the impact of the Ukraine war and the policies around it on the overall geopolitical situation, and I think damage it's done to the United States position. So let's start off with the situation. It existed before the war in 2021. When at that time, I'd say there's four countries that are of primary concern from a national security point of view that we're dealt with. We'll start with some of the smaller ones first, which would be North Korea. And the main issue there was our nuclear program and the possibility that it might undermine the basic deterrence of the South Korean military against North Korea. And then much more troubling was the fact they were working on an ICBM that could reach the United States, which prompted us to develop previously a limited ballistic missile defense system of moderate effectiveness, but it's something. Then you have Iran, which has its ongoing nuclear program, and that program has been a major bone of contention between the United States and Iran, leading to sanctions under Trump and a more lax policy trying to kind of buy them off under Biden, neither one of which have really dissuaded them. And then we have, of course, the big one, China. China is, of course, a near-peer competitor now, the second biggest economy in the world and growing fast, and a growing military power. And this, of course, is a major concern for us. So that's, a thing that's a big one. Then we have Russia, which was not as big of a problem as China. It is a near peer in nuclear capabilities, I think, overall. But really, the main issues we had with Russia really were these false claims of election interference, which probably has a lot to do with the current policies. And also, I think, their involvement in Syria and the civil war in Syria, the actions in Africa with the Wagner Group and so forth, all of which have been a bit of a contention. But the big issue is the relatively aggressive stance of NATO trying to expand right up to Russia's doorstep. And I think that while the Baltic states got in, of course, and after, of course, we have Poland and Romania. But at this point, Russia kind of drew a line at Georgia and Ukraine, and so this of course led to the crisis that in early 2022, which then exploded into a war. And so I want to point out that initially I believe that Russia made a major miscalculation, both on the reaction of the West and the United States, and also I think also that the degree to which Ukraine would be able to fight back. I get the feeling that Russia initially thought that they could roll over Ukraine somewhat like the United States did over Iraq back in the Second Gulf War. And of course, that failed to be the case. And that led to Russia to attempt to negotiate an end to the thing, which I guess they were insisting on retaining only Crimea, and were willing to withdraw in return for some autonomy, let's say, for the Donbass regions. But of course, that was rejected by Western powers, fronted by, of course, Boris Johnson of Britain, but probably no doubt backed also by the U.S. State Department. So that's kind of the situation that led to the current war, with the diplomatic solution not available to Russia. They ultimately were forced to engage in a massive mobilization. And this is where some of the problems I'm going to go into came from. Because, but by the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like. I'm looking for more subscriptions as always. And of course, to those that have subscribed, can click the bell for notifications. I think though, let's say that as this thing has gone on for over 2 years, there doesn't seem at this point that there's any likelihood that Ukraine is going to actually, quote, win the war by actually, forcing Russia out of the country completely and retaking Crimea. I think that doesn't seem to be in the offing. But the other negative effects has been that these four countries, which well, weren't at all too closely allied prior to this crisis, really. Um, the situation ultimately has led to a much closer relationship with them. For instance, Russia, of course, and China have formed a partnership largely based on energy supplies from Russia to China to give them an alternative to those from the Middle East, which is always volatile, of course. And then the other aspect has been that, for instance, Russia then has become much closer to Iran than they were previously. I won't say that they had the negative reaction that we had to what Iran was doing, but I don't think they were actually supporting their nuclear program or anything previous. But now they've sort of had to form a reliance because Russia's getting drones in large quantities from Iran. So Iran has become a military supplier to Russia. Now, the situation with North Korea has become somewhat more serious, and it's the following way. Russia, needing large quantities of artillery ammunition and tactical rockets and missiles, have been procuring these apparently from North Korea. And what are they getting in return? Well, of course, oil and food, but something else. The design for a MIRV ICBM, which is known in NATO parlance as the SS-27, which is a six-warhead MIRV modern ICBM, way beyond what the single-warhead ICBM that North Korea had been working on before. So now the actual potential threat to the continental United States and the ability to overwhelm our limited defense system I mentioned earlier is now coming as a consequence of this war. Because they wouldn't be doing this if they weren't, to some degree, being stressed by our effort. They are being stressed, that's no doubt, but they haven't collapsed, and now they're doing very dangerous things. Now, let's also look at the situation in the Middle East. I mean, while it's pretty clear cut, I think that the Hamas attack on Israel that led to the current conflict in Gaza, and of course the Houthi attacks on international shipping, would not have occurred. I don't think if it hadn't been for the fact that the relationship between Russia and Iran developed. Now that Russia is somewhat dependent on Iran, now Russia's probably giving them the green light to have their surrogates go forward with these operations, knowing that they'll, of course, be supported in the UN Security Council by the Russian veto if necessary. So you begin to see that all these negative developments spin out of this, for the most part, out of this Ukraine war strategy, this idea of trying to turn Ukraine into a NATO member, for which there was no real need, because prior to the effort by the State Department and to to promote the coup against the previous Ukrainian government, the Russians weren't doing anything hostile or aggressive toward Ukraine. But when they saw that their naval base in Crimea, which was key to their fleet at the time, was potentially not only going to be lost, but potentially might become a NATO naval base, I think that spurred them into action. And of course, the question is, why are we taking such a hostile stance toward Russia? Well, that's a whole other issue. One, it is the strongest nuclear counterweight to the United States, although I think China is gaining on that and will probably equal parity soon, somewhere in probably the early 2030 period. Nonetheless, this is a very concerning. So I think the other thing you'd have to look at is, perhaps there was an idea of exploiting Russia's resources. Some people claim that that's the idea, that we'd like to turn Russia into a docile state that is an obedient dog to our calls or something. That's one thought. But apparently, Russia's recovered quite a bit since the Yeltsin period. And so I think that's why that seems to me not very, helpful. And like I said, I think at the outset of the crisis in late 2021 and 22, we could have easily negotiated a deal with the Russians of Ukrainian neutrality in return for more of a hands-off attitude by the Russians and some sort of concessions along the lines of what was called the Minsk Accords to provide a degree of autonomy to the Russian ethnic areas in the Donbass. But that was so totally rejected that we basically triggered this conflict. And this is costing us additional money, but it's also leading to large quantities of our military stocks that might be necessary for other conflicts, such as potentially with China, being diverted to Ukraine. And now the situation in the Middle East has also led to these more to be deleted to Israel. And of course, this all plays into strengthening Russia's hand. And after a failed offensive by the Ukrainians in 2023, it looks like now that the Russians are on the offensive overall, and so we don't know how far that's going to go. While I've argued that I don't think that the collapse of Ukraine is imminent, and Ukraine can always pull off their little trick sucker punch attacks, which are kind of impressive at times. And in fact, just as recently today, yesterday, I mean, that the Ukrainians managed to launch some limited attacks into Russian territory around Belgorod and further to the west, which probably is designed to have some impact probably on the Russian elections coming up this weekend, or a distraction from some other military operation that Ukraine is planning on conducting. Some arguments I've heard that there might be an attempt to do something in southern Kherson region. So at any rate, this is an ongoing problem we have, and we really ought to consider, I think, backing away from this, because the current trend in terms of escalation of the Korean nuclear capability, which is really a negative development, and perhaps Iran also going forward to get nuclear weapons. This represents a big setback from our policies. Plus, we have ongoing, I think the economic sanctions against Russia may be having impacts through the non-aligned world along the lines of people realizing the danger of relying too much on the U.S. financial mechanism, the U.S. dollar, and realizing how quickly we can turn that against them if they don't obey commands. And so this is overall, I think, leading to reactions that are not desirable for our economic future or for international stability. Anyway, that's the case I want to make about that. I think I don't know what people's general reaction is, but I want to emphasize that none of this is saying that overall Russia is right, or certainly their invasion, I believe, was a miscalculation and a bad move, and I think it's really kind of unnecessary, frankly. But nevertheless, and had a lot of bad side effects, including the entry of Sweden and Finland into the NATO, which I'm sure they don't want that. But I think also this is having a lot of negative effects on our policies as well. And I think that it'd be good that we could try to move away from the period of confrontation and escalation, such as what the French are considering or talking about, and more toward a period of negotiations to bring this thing to a reasonable halt. Because right now, the bulk of Ukraine is still being defended successfully, and Russia's a long ways from conquering it, and the possibilities of what could go wrong if this conflict continues for Russia alone may be sufficient that we have a good entree into a negotiated position. Plus, of course, we have a lot of economic sanctions that could be removed in return for a peace deal. So anyway, that's kind of what I think about the subject. And of course, I'll be posting this on Rumble as always, and here on YouTube. And of course, my social media account addresses are in the description below. So until next time.